ultimately, by restricting those flavors, we're going to have a response. If we just stuck to those four, the response from the public, again, demand is not going to change. People are going to look to two courses of action that in the polling I've done. One is to go to the black market to purchase the flavors they want. And that I think is bad because we don't quite know necessarily the quality of those illicit market products. And then the other response is people are more likely to go back to smoking, and people who are smokers are more likely to stay as smokers. So ironically, the Tobacco and Vapes Bill claims to be working to reduce smoking rates, but up to 2027, there's clear evidence that this will increase smoking rates from the level they otherwise would be.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast Vaping Unplugged. I'm Liza. I'm going to be your host today. And today we will be talking about the situation in the UK. And we have a very interesting guest, Mark Oates, the director of We Vape, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the UK, what's the situation with vaping and not only. Thank you so much, Mark, for your time today and for making it to our podcast. I'm really thrilled.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Well, I know we actually had the episode before, so it's not the first time for you participating in this podcast, but I would still, and probably most of our listeners already know you, but I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself as a first thing, just an introduction, maybe what is We Vape up to right now and your personal vaping journey. Always appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'll start with the personal journey. I was living and working in China and smoking 50 pence a pack cigarettes. And frankly, had no interest in quitting. I was a young man, and when you're a young man, I think thinking about your existence and your health is not top of the list. And so I think you're more focused on the next day, week, month than you are on something that could happen to you in 50 years in the future. But it was flying home from China where I stopped off in Sweden on a layover and bought some Swedish snus, not really knowing what it was. And I tried it and I thought this product is fantastic. But on returning to the UK, I found the product was illegal to be sold. And so the UK government, with their ban, were complicit in keeping me smoking because when I ran out of snus, I went back to cigarettes. And then it was when I introduced vaping and snus, when I could get hold of it, into the game, that I actually ended up quitting, really very much by accident. Really because I enjoyed the products more than combustible cigarettes. And I think that's important because there's two types of people that tend to quit through vaping and safer products. There's those that are trying and failing to quit smoking through various normal cessation methods and through cold turkey, and then they try vaping and they find it's more successful. And the studies clearly show that vaping is more successful than nicotine replacement therapy at helping people quit. And then there's the other group of people, which in the UK is about half of smokers, that don't want to quit. But they may try a safer nicotine product and find they actually enjoy it more, and so quit by accident, accidental quitters. In regards to We Vape, we're working to try and get the message to politicians and the public as well about the fact that vaping is vastly safer than smoking, and get those stories about people quitting to politicians because the environment at the moment is not great. The media scare stories have really started to go against us, and the clickbait articles are extreme. So we're doing a lot of that. And then also the legislation that's going through Parliament, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. This is the biggest upheaval in vaping we've had for about 15 years, or since the TPD came in the EU. And it's really important the government gets this right because lives are at stake.
Definitely. We will be talking about the misinformation and the clickbait articles for sure, because it caused a lot of scandal. But before we do that, can we actually talk about the legislative background in the UK at the moment? As you mentioned, there is a shift as UK was considered to be one of the harm reduction champions when it comes to this field, and now there is a shift. And maybe you could make it clear for our listeners what is going on with the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, or and what kind of regulations should we anticipate, and generally what's the background?
So they've lumped together vaping with tobacco and cigarettes, which I think in the first place is a mistake. They're not the same, and we do have an issue with people thinking they're the same, and it leads to people continuing to smoke when they might quit. And the main proposal when it comes to cigarettes is to actually prohibit the sale of cigarettes to anyone born after January 2009. And that will start to take effect in 2027. And if you read the government's impact assessment on that, it's quite clear that this bill will do nothing to reduce smoking between now and 2027. And when it does, they've literally licked their finger and stuck it in the air to try and work out what effect the prohibition on the sale of cigarettes will have. And there's no real evidence base for how they've come to their conclusion. But it's quite wishful thinking. I think it frustrates me. Politicians have this belief that if they just ban something, the problem will go away. But we know from other products where you ban the supply of a product, it doesn't end the demand for that product. So I don't think that is going to be the solution that politicians think it is. They talk as if that will just end smoking on day one, which I don't think it will. And that's why the safer nicotine products are the real answer when it comes to reducing smoking rates and smoking harms. In regards to vaping, they are really going to take risks with people's lives because they're going to make vaping less appealing to smokers who would otherwise quit. So the bill itself doesn't ban flavors, but what it does do is it hands the power to government to, at any stage in the future, make changes to the laws and regulations around flavors without actually having to go to Parliament to get it voted through in the main assembly. They can use what's called secondary legislation, which never fails. It's a free pass for the government. So the plan is the government will introduce this legislation. They will then have a consultation on flavors, and then they will then, based hopefully on the answers to that consultation, perhaps if the answers are what we want, what would be good for health, they will then regulate based on that. And we don't know yet what they will do. They might do something more mild, which is perhaps make regulations around flavor names. So getting rid of some of the silly names, unicorn dust. I think all adult vapors can agree there's no need to have a unicorn dust flavor name. They could restrict flavors to just 4 flavors, which they've talked about: menthol, mint, and fruit, and then also tobacco flavor. That'd be highly frustrating for me because there's lots of flavors that I like which aren't within that category. So cola, I'm quite enjoying donut for some reason. Ultimately, by restricting those flavors, we're going to have a response. If we just stuck to those 4, the response from the public, again, demand is not going to change. People are going to look to 2 courses of action that, in the polling I've done. One is to go to the black market to purchase the flavors they want. And that, I think, is bad because we don't quite know necessarily the quality of those illicit market products. And then the other response is people are more likely to go back to smoking, and people who are smokers are more likely to stay as smokers. So ironically, the Tobacco and Vapes Bill claims to be working to reduce smoking rates, but up to 2027, there's clear evidence that this will increase smoking rates from the level they otherwise would be, because the measures on smoking are not going to come into effect at all until 2027. And the measures they're doing on vaping are looking to make it less appealing for someone to quit smoking through vaping. So, what they say, don't judge a politician on what they aim to do in a piece of legislation. You've got to judge them on the results. And sadly, the media have sort of bought into this hook, line, and sinker that this is going to reduce smoking when actually it can have the opposite effect. And I think it's highly immoral. There's more than just a tobacco and vapes bill going on at the moment in the UK. So disposables are going to be banned this summer. What's the result of that? Well, probably a much larger black market, which is already quite rife. And then also people that don't use the black market are more likely to stay as a smoker. Disposables have their problems, the environmental impact, the fact they're probably quite easy access. The way to deal with the environmental impact is to initiate, I think, a deposit return scheme. So we can recycle 99.9% of these vapes. The reason why people use disposables is because they mimic, in terms of convenience, traditional cigarettes as closely as possible. You don't have to recharge them. You can be on a night out with your friends and your vape runs out and you go grab a disposable, and that keeps them from smoking. So it's a health win. So the government's own impact assessment on that ban suggests 30% of vapers are likely to return to smoking. That's hundreds of thousands of people returning to smoking. That's hundreds of thousands of people dying prematurely because of this ban. How anyone in public health or in public policy can advocate something like that is beyond my understanding. The other big issue, which again is not part of this bill, it's a separate one, is a tax on vaping liquids. And we know that when you increase the price of a product, the demand for it is going to reduce, and that's going to incentivize people to consume cigarettes. So again, the three headwinds of potential restrictions on flavors, of ban on disposables, and tax is going to lead to more smokers than there otherwise would be. And it's deplorable. What else is the bill doing? Okay, so there is some measures that I think are useful and good. One is the government has the power at a later date to introduce a licensing scheme, so that we can try and have more control over who is selling vapes and crack down on people selling vapes that aren't compliant with our regulations, and vapes that are convenience store owners who are selling to under 18s. So that is a positive, but it's only really a positive if the money raised goes towards our trading standards, whose job it is to police these shops. So it's vital they get that part right. It'd be a major mistake if the money just went into a pot and was spent on roads.
I see, yes. I mean, the number that you said about people returning to smoking is really tragic, especially while thinking about all the progress that the UK already made. The UK has been championing harm reduction policies, and there was a huge progress in smoking decline, actually. And now there is a shift in this legislation and this approach generally. So as a follow-up question, and maybe that this also ties in with all the misinformation that we are about to talk about, what's the reason of this change? What do you think is the reasoning behind this shift?
So the legislative changes in America led to Chinese companies looking for new markets, and they flooded the UK with these single-use vapes. And what that did is it took, you've always been able to get in the UK flavors of a huge variety but normally from your traditional vape shop, specialist vape shop, and you used an open system and you bought bottles of the e-liquid and then you refilled them. And vape shops in the UK, and I've done test purchases, they are hot and keen on things like ID. They even some ask if you're a current smoker or a current vapor and refuse you service if you're not. What the single-use products did was it shifted all those flavors into the convenience store environment, which before tended to have limited flavors. And the convenience stores are not in any way as hot on things like ID checks. And the profit that can be made is large. And the fines that are given for selling to under 18 are tiny. I think there was one case of a shop being fined £28. That's not going to stop someone doing it because they're making maybe £4 or £5 per vape they're selling. So they need to sell, 6 vapes and they've recovered their fine. A lot of these convenience stores take the view where they may as well take the risk. So that increase and that availability led to some young people taking up the product. What we did see in that time is a massive decline in smoking in under 18s, but an increase in vaping. And I think that there's what I would call new technology bias. So whereas no one was really complaining about people in my age group when we were under 18 smoking cigarettes, there were no big newspaper articles about us smoking cigarettes and a moral panic. Because this product is new and it gets headlines, then there has been a moral panic over it, even though the number of people vaping is not too dissimilar to the number of people who are smoking. So that led to multiple stories and a whole change in the environment and how people perceive the product. We've seen some very bad studies, quotation marks, that have led to headlines which suggest that vaping and smoking are comparable in terms of harm. When you delve into those studies, what you find is that one study I saw, which led to a headline, "Vaping is as dangerous as smoking." The study, all it did was measure your heart rate and your blood pressure when you consumed a vaping product versus when you consumed a cigarette. And we know caffeine and nicotine increase your heart rate, they increase your blood pressure, but that's not the thing that causes damage to you. But they were using that as a comparison. So we've just had a shift in the environment. We've had a moral panic, and frustratingly, the youth use has led that. And it's why I'm actually very supportive and keen to reduce youth use within a level of understanding that we have to accept that young people will do things they're not allowed to do. And in the UK, we have a far more young people drinking alcohol illegally than we do vaping. We have far more young people going to hospital with alcohol-related poisonings than we do with vaping, but we don't see the headlines from it.
Right. Talking about headlines, there's been a lot of misinformation around vaping generally in the whole world. But recently, there was this Mirror article, which was total clickbait, and it's was quoting an unpublished study. And generally, it seems like media is taking up the studies that might have a flaw in the methodology, but no one is checking that. And then the other media is also duplicating the headline, and consumers read it and they get scared instantly because they don't dig into the details of it. So what do you think, first of all, about that part of it? And then how can we fight it as consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think researchers and journalists should be aware of the role they play and how they can impact people's lives and lead to people dying because they're going to be more likely to stick to smoking if they read these headlines that suggest they're one and the same, when we know they're not. We know vaping is vastly safer than smoking. This study in particular was a student of physical education. I understand. I think he's a doctorate. And he was looking into, again, the physiological effect of a vapor when it comes to running on an exercise treadmill or an exercise bike. And we don't know how long those people that are vapors have previously quit smoking. So look, if you take someone who's a vapor, but they've been vaping a week, then you're not going to see huge physiological changes and improvements in their physiological capabilities. And there was a sort of whistleblower that's come up on Twitter that suggested that it was a matter of weeks that you could be described as a vapor. So yeah, taking someone who's a vapor and studying them versus, say, a non-vapor doesn't take into account the fact that someone who is a vapor was probably a smoker for a long time. And obviously we can't do studies where we take people who have never smoked and compare a non-smoker with a vapor who's also a non-smoker. So that alone, a lot of these studies are flawed. And the other side of that is, yeah, we don't even know the methodology and the amount of studies that come out and get a headline and then they're actually retracted because under peer review, it turns out it's completely bogus and false science is enormous. But we never see a new headline to point out that the study that led to that big headline a few months ago, was not good science. And it's incredibly frustrating and disappointing because in the UK now, we have over half, the majority of smokers think that vaping is as dangerous as smoking. And that's awful. And we know the more think that vaping is as dangerous, the less are willing to quit or want to quit through vaping. So it's keeping people smoking. It's keeping people getting ill through smoking.
Yeah, for sure. It's really, really bad to see this kind of consequences of the misinformation. Could we also talk about not only vaping, but other safer nicotine alternatives? What's going on? Because we talked about the legislation and how vaping will be regulated, but what about pouches or snus or heat-not-burn? So could you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, heat-not-burn has a really important role. I think and strongly believe what you need to offer people is a plethora of options. You don't want to prescribe one solution to them. And why vaping has been a success is because it's been the consumer themselves that have led the improvement in their own health. It's not been prescribed to them by a doctor. And the very fact this isn't a medicinal product has led to a greater reduction in smoking rates and improvement in health. So heat-not-burn, it's not got huge consumption numbers in the UK, but when I speak to heat-not-burn consumer, they prefer it because it mimics a cigarette more than, say, a vaping product does. There's the multiple things. One is the taste, because you are heating a tobacco product. The other thing is the fact that it's a finite length of time that you consume it for, whereas a vape is more continuous. So heat-not-burn's played a great role in reducing smoking rates, and heat-not-burn, sadly, is being lumped in with cigarettes. So that will be banned under the generational ban, just as cigarettes are. Again, ironically, for what they're aiming to do, this will lead to more smoking, because you're not going to see black market sellers of heat-not-burn products. You're going to see black market sellers of cigarette products. So if you are in that cohort that can't legally buy cigarettes, and you also can't buy heat-not-burn products, you're going to be more likely to end up consuming cigarettes, because they're going to be more widely available on the black market, or to people that are willing to sell to underage people. So it's a major mistake. And this comes down to the fact that many in tobacco control just hold the belief that tobacco is bad. But that's not the truth. The truth is how and what product you consume determines how bad it is. So combustible cigarettes are extremely bad for your health. But if you remove that combustion, through Swedish snus or through heat-not-burn products, then you can dramatically reduce the harm. And we see that in Sweden with the use of Swedish snus, and how they have such better outcomes when it comes to health, lower smoking-related illnesses, the second lowest oral cancers, because they use snus rather than smoking. And they have a very similar rate of nicotine consumption. They just do it through a safer means. And Japan is got some fantastic data already coming through in regards to heat-not-burn products. So that ideology, which a lot of that side has, which is I just hate tobacco, I hate tobacco, I hate tobacco, is leading to people dying. And it's deeply frustrating. Now, in regards to nicotine pouches, they've effectively been largely unregulated since they came onto the market. And I've been calling, and others have been calling, for a regulatory framework in order to make sure that we don't have a moral panic through scare stories of under 18s getting hold of products, or too stronger products causing people to get nicotine pouch drunk, which can sort of happen. And people getting nicotine pouch drunk leads to headlines. You don't see those headlines when people get drunk on alcohol. Hugely frustrating. Someone doesn't consume nicotine before and they try a nicotine pouch, and they can become in the short term a bit ill, and that gets in the newspapers. But look, if someone who'd never drunk alcohol before started drinking vodka, of course they'd get ill. That in itself doesn't mean we should ban alcohol. So legally, they can currently be sold under 18s. Now, there isn't a huge market for that. It doesn't seem that that's happening a lot. The retailers don't even know that technically you could sell it to under 18. They are doing the age verification largely. Of course, there's some bad players, bad actors. But so I've been advocating for a age restriction on them to prevent under 18s getting hold of them, because we tend to have a view in society alcohol, nicotine, and more broadly and growing caffeine are not for under 18s. And the government was, for the last 5 years, extremely reticent to do that. And it's frustrating because you can write to the government and say, look, this is a hole here. We should fill it. We should have an age restriction. And they respond with, no, everything's fine. Sometimes I feel like the only way the government listens is if you have a newspaper headline about it, which isn't really good policy making. Anyhow, they have introduced in this bill an age restriction. So that is a win. Frustratingly, the product is going to be regulated in the same way as vaping. I actually think it should have standalone regulations. It is a separate product. Flavors in nicotine pouches are very subtle compared to vaping. And at the moment, we don't have crazy flavor names, etc. So I think it'd be a major mistake if they end up banning some flavors in nicotine in vaping products, and they do the same for nicotine pouches. Right now I'm got some lemon flavor. I don't know if that would be legal in the future, but I think it's important. It is. So yeah, having said all that about the regulations, I think it's important to note that the nicotine pouches are having a great role in reducing smoking rates. We don't really have strong evidence for it yet in terms of data. Not many people are studying it, and they should. But just looking around at my friends and people I meet, and the amount of people I see with nicotine pouches at the pub on their table is just growing and growing and growing. And that's great. They're improving their health through choosing nicotine pouches and over smoking.
Yeah, definitely. The more options the consumers will have to avoid combustion and consume nicotine in less risky forms, that's better for public health overall. So as far as I understand, there's some things in the process right now in the UK, and we're waiting to see what's going to come out of it eventually. So as a sum up question, should we consider that the UK has moved away from its commitment to harm reduction approach, or it's not that tragic and vaping is still going to be helping people to quit smoking? Because as far as I understand, that is not off the table right now. They're not banning vapes, they're taking flavors, but it might still be, there might be a bright side on it, right?
Yeah, so there is still a strong understanding and a recognition of the role of vaping in reducing smoking rates, and that is a positive. You could argue, you ask, is the UK still got a harm reduction approach? My understanding is we never really did have a harm reduction approach. We just had an approach of vaping seems to work in helping reduce smoking. Now, the question I would ask is, how does vaping have an approach in reducing health harms and smoking rates? Well, the answer is harm reduction, right? But we've perhaps struggled to see that and broaden it out. And therefore, at the moment, we're not taking advantage of nicotine pouches as much as we could by having them in smoking cessation centres. And we haven't taken advantage of heat not burn products. If your aim is to reduce smoking rates, I know if I had the policy levers, I could do it extremely quickly. If we had the chief medical officer having a little note in every pack of cigarettes saying, did you know nicotine pouches, heat not burn, and vaping products are vastly safer for you than smoking, that would have an enormous effect. But we don't. And the result is the government's policy, perhaps by accident, is leading to more people smoking for longer because it's not taking as proactive approach as it could do on the harm reduction side. If you look at other areas of health, the government is very willing to take a proactive approach, and there's an element of fear on this subject to not take the proactive approach to reduce health harms.
As far as I understand, there's a lot of areas where consumers can fight back and ask policymakers to have a better progressive approach when it comes to smoking cessation. And what as a final question, what would be your message? First of all, to consumers for whom these products are important in their quitting journey, and what would be your message to policymakers as well who are coming up with a regulation that is counterproductive for public health eventually?
So we had an election last year, and so we have a huge swathe of new MPs who aren't very well versed. They've been brought up in an environment of reading the newspaper headlines. And whereas some of the older MPs had met their constituents who had told them their story about how they quit smoking, these new ones maybe haven't heard that story. So if you are a vapor or a consumer, get in touch with them now. Send them a letter or write to them on email. Ask to meet them. And you don't need to, it doesn't need to go into all the amazing science that we have to back up the fact that vaping is safer than smoking. If you can find it, take it along. Show them the public health report that says it's at least 95% safer. Show them the studies that it's a better smoking cessation tool than nicotine replacement therapy. But at the very least, just tell them how you used to be a 20-a-day smoker and you weren't able to quit, and vaping led to you quitting. Tell them what flavor you like, because it is important for a policymaker to hear that an adult quite likes cherry ice or cola or whatever, and that these aren't just a way of attracting young people. So tell that story, and know that you're powerful. Okay, so every constituency in the UK has probably around 5,000-6,000 vapors. If you look at each MP, a large amount of them, their majority, their position is less than that number that led to them getting into Parliament. Some of them have a majority of only, say, 50 voters. So those MPs are aware that they need to listen to their constituents. And, you can tell them, look, I want to vote for a member of Parliament who is going to help reduce smoking through vaping, and attempts to damage my freedom to vape, attempts to remove my freedom to vape, is going to harm people. It's going to harm me. It may lead me to go back to smoking. So please don't do it. Let's take a pragmatic approach. I think MPs will listen. MPs, when I speak to them, do understand. They do want to improve their constituencies. They do want to improve public health, but they are bombarded often by this very powerful group funded by money from an American, and they therefore hear that side of the story. So we've got to do more to make sure our side of the story is heard. In regards to policymakers, try and open the eyes a little bit, and recognize that it's not a case of just telling people what to do, that people have their own decision-making process. And in areas of other public health, whether that's the HIV epidemic, whether that's other illnesses, we haven't taken an approach of just telling people don't do it, just don't do it. We've said, well, how can you do it more safely? Condoms, there's a drug called PrEP. So if you're at risk of contracting HIV, you won't contract it if you do come into contact with someone who has it. That's a harm reduction approach, and it works. We're clean needle exchanges, helping people who are addicted to heroin, providing them with safer alternatives, and then weaning them off them. This is a long-standing method for improving public health. It's not some new crazy thing. And so hopefully open your mind, open your eyes, see that this harm reduction is all around us, from seatbelts in cars to helmets for motorcycle riders. And if we can open their eyes, then we can have a huge win, which is reducing the number of deaths from smoking.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mark. I couldn't agree more with what was said. This is the last part of our interview, so I just want to thank our listeners, and thank you, Mark, for your time. First of all, it's always a pleasure to have you as our guest. And let's hope for better policies in the UK as well for the consumers. For our listeners, I just want to tell you thank you, and stay tuned, because we're going to be back with another episode next week as well. Vape on, and bye-bye.